Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Looking for Trouble by Jess Lea, narrated by Gould. Chapter 1. Was this what it felt like to be dead? Nancy clutched her head and squinted in the morning sun. On North Vale's High Street, the air was murky with traffic fumes and takeaway coffee. A tram clanged past, making her wince. She groaned. I am never turning 30 again. Students and office workers swarmed past her up the ramp to the railway station, their bumping and jostling making her queasy. What was wrong with her? She'd only gone to a wine bar on a weeknight, eaten seafood pizza at 2 a.m., then slept on a friend's couch. That sort of thing had never been a problem before, but this morning her back ached and her head felt full of gravel. Was she starting to get old? She paused to give her change to the woman who sat outside the 7-Eleven, wrapped in a blanket. "Morning, Trudy." Trudy gazed up at her through tired eyes. "Are those the clothes you had on yesterday?" With a sigh, Nancy turned away. If she was getting older, shouldn't she be growing more dignified too? After all, she was an academic, an intellectual, a professional thinker. Cheer up. Maybe in her 4th decade everything would get better. Maybe she would evolve into a distinguished, elegant woman with a French sports car, an all-black wardrobe, and a witty reply to everything. A kid on a scooter zoomed past, missing her by an inch. She squeaked in alarm and stumbled sideways to avoid a burger squished on the footpath. Someone dressed as a koala held up a petition for a wildlife charity. "Sorry, not today," Nancy said. "Aw, fuck you, you bourgeois bitch," yelled a nasal voice from inside the costume. "You don't care about the koalas at all." I do, actually." The koala stormed off, lifting a furry middle finger at her. Okay, so perhaps her new, sophisticated self would emerge tomorrow. It was only one stop home. She should really walk, but she couldn't face the exercise. At the entrance to the station, half a dozen people in red T-shirts handed out leaflets. Nancy tried to look past them. "Please don't talk to me." "G'day there." The voice sounded older and a little gruff, with a raspy edge that suggested the speaker had once spent a lot of time smoking or shouting. "You look like a woman who knows her own mind. Got a second? There's a by-election coming up here in North Vale, and we're representing your Labour candidate, Martin Argyle." "I can't talk now." Nancy's mouth felt like sandpaper. "I'm in a hurry." "Yeah, I can see that. Try out for the Olympic team, is it?" Was this person heckling her? A poor, honest, hungover citizen just trying to get home and shower? Nancy glared at the intruder blocking her path. She was a solid woman with a greying crew cut, a keychain, and flannelette sleeves rolled up to reveal weathered olive skin and tattoos that looked more truck driver than hipster. With her square shoulders and ramrod straight stance, she seemed taller than she was. The woman grinned. "Only kidding. Top night, was it?" She winked. "I bet when you walk into a nightclub, rugby players run out screaming." Nancy stared at her. Really? Had things come to this? Not only had she turned 30 without developing an air of mystery or a sparkling wit, but now she couldn't even catch the train home without some joker harassing her. The fact that this woman was rather good-looking in a weather-beaten kind of way only made Nancy more annoyed. There was nothing worse than being spoken to rudely by someone you could, hypothetically, think was cute. If you must know, some friends took me out for sangria to cheer me up because I'm now indisputably a grown-up, with a PhD no less, but somehow I'm still working poorly paid tutoring jobs and living in a share house from hell, and I spent the night on their sofa, which was apparently made of cardboard and fencing wire, meaning I lay awake thinking of all the things I always imagined I'd be doing with my life by now and how I'd be spending it, with a woman who doesn't annoy me and inspires me to do better." She took a breath. "So, yes, it was a wonderful night. Thank you for asking." Oh dear. Offloading onto strangers wasn't like her at all. She must be sicker than she thought. Had she hoped this campaigner would feel sorry for her, or get embarrassed and move away? Instead, the woman laughed. "Well, it sounds like you should vote for our lot then. We stand for decent wages, affordable housing and healthcare for everyone, including physio for when sofas attack." She took a step closer. "Come on, let me convince you." Was she for real? Nancy narrowed her eyes. All right, the woman was a little rugged, and she had a clean, scrubbed smell about her, like plain soap, which was sort of attractive on the right person, and she had a no-nonsense air that wasn't totally off-putting, an air of someone used to taking charge. But Nancy shouldn't get distracted by that. The woman was a pushy, insensitive pest, stopping her from getting home and lying down. Nancy summoned a superior tone. "I teach political science at the university. I know why this by-election is happening." "Do you?" She hesitated. "Yes." Nancy folded her arms. "Because our last MP died, and I know why." The woman's smile faded, her grip around the flyers tightened. Nancy had seized the upper hand at last. "Bill O'Brien was the MP here for 16 years, and a member of your party for, 30 years? Until it was recently revealed that he was never eligible to hold office at all, and he wasn't an Australian citizen. His parents moved here from England when Bill was a baby and forgot to sort out his paperwork. Someone, probably a disgruntled family member, figured out the truth and leaked it to the press. Basically, Bill had been deceiving the public and breaking the law for years. That was an accident. How was he meant to know?" The woman's shoulders had stiffened, her jaw lifted as if for a fight. "Still," Nancy said, "it was a humiliating mistake, and the media had a field day. I wrote an article about it for Australian Political Science." "Did you now?" Her tone rumbled a warning. "And then Bill O'Brien passed away," Nancy faltered, realising too late that she should not have said all that. It was too harsh, too soon, but she couldn't back out now. "After that fiasco, why should anyone trust your party to run the country?" "Who are you, a talkback radio host?" her opponent glared. "It was one mistake, and you've got a nerve blaming us for what happened to Bill, as if all you professional smartasses who wrote your bloody articles about him had nothing to do with it." "George," a girl of about 19 sidled over. She smiled nervously. "Remember what we talked about in training? We're here to educate people and build positive rapport with the community." "Oh, bugger off, comrade," George said. "I was door-knocking for the party when you were in your pram." "Must be why Australians haven't voted Labor for years, then," Nancy said. "I've written about that, too." She stepped past them and moved up the ramp to the station platform. From behind her, the younger woman said, "George, you didn't even mention Martin, our candidate, remember? We're meant to talk about his top 5 personal passion projects. Wait, you can't chase people. We're not allowed on the platform." George's motorcycle boots clumped as she caught up with Nancy. "You know, I don't like your attitude." She looked Nancy up and down, then sneered. "You latte-sipping types, moving into these old migrant suburbs. You buy up all the houses. You make us put up with your bike lanes and your wood fires and your late-night cheese bars, and we don't complain." Nancy raised an eyebrow. "I find that hard to believe." "But when you insult a decent bloke like Bill and hand our electorate over to the Greens or the Sex Party or some ironic candidate dressed as a pirate, well, that's where I draw the line." "Great. Draw it yourself. My train's here." The screen flashed, announcing the arrival of the 8:05 service. The crossing bells sounded as the train approached. Nancy stepped forward on the crowded platform. "Have a nice day," George said sarcastically. "Hope your head's not sore or anything." Scowling, Nancy turned around to reply. A moving weight slammed into her, knocking her forward. There was a roar and a blast of air as the train shot past. Nancy stumbled, her ankle giving way. She lost her balance and began to topple. The train was so close, the bright paint, the glinting windows, the gap between the rushing metal giant and the rim of the platform, wide enough to see down, wide enough to fall down. "Hey!" Strong hands seized her arm and hauled her backwards. "What the hell?" She clutched onto her rescuer. The train slowed. Gradually, the world stopped spinning. Jesus! Nancy's heart pounded as she steadied herself. She glanced up. George, Appalled, she let go. The train had come to a halt, and people hurried on and off. George shouted after the culprit, a man on a bicycle who'd hit Nancy in his rush to reach the last carriage. "Watch where you're going, you clown! You come back here and apologise." The man gave them a blank look and loaded his bike into the train. "Arsehat," George muttered. "You okay?"
Yes, I'm quite all right,"
Nancy cringed.
"Thank you."
Her arm burned where George had grabbed her. "No worries." George looked away, shifting her weight from foot to foot, as if equally uncomfortable with how this exchange had turned out. "Well, I'd better go." Nancy hurried forward and elbowed her way into the packed carriage. George stood, frowning, on the platform. She nodded what might have been a goodbye before the doors snapped shut. Nancy stood under the shower, one hand braced against the ugly pink tiles with their faded pattern of seashells. The water pelted her shoulders. "I could have died back there." She told herself to stop being so dramatic. Didn't everyone nearly fall in front of a train at some point? Still, her knees wobbled. If that awful, rude, stroppy George hadn't been there? God, if Nancy had died today, what would she have left behind? A room full of second-hand books and furniture? Some students she may or may not have inspired? And a few articles published in academic journals that had a readership of about 10? Even her last conversation had been nothing to be proud of, pontificating about a local by-election and poor dead Bill O'Brien. Her stomach heaved, last night's seafood pizza making a bid for freedom. She thrust her face under the water. Snap out of it. The rattle of the broken ceiling fan and the clanking of the pipes almost drowned out the noise from the terrace houses on either side, the elderly neighbours on the left blasting Greek radio, and the woman on the right shrieking at her toddler. "Madeline! Mummy doesn't like it when you take Mummy's phone. Madeline, Mummy's not angry, but you're not being considerate of me." One morning, after listening to an hour of that, Nancy had thumped on the dividing wall and said, "Madeline, for the love of God, give the phone back, and please tell your mother to lower her voice." She'd regretted it later. There was a complaint made to the landlord about Nancy's appalling rudeness. But those 10 minutes of shocked silence had almost been worth it. She opened her eyes and looked at the ceiling speckled with mould and the overflowing rubbish bin. A mummified grey sock had lain in the corner of the bathroom since last year. She refused to pick it up on principle, believing the culprit would be shamed into doing the right thing, eventually. She was still waiting. When Nancy had first moved in here, she'd tried drawing up a cleaning roster. Someone had used it to mop up marinara sauce, then left it balled up in the sink. If I'd died today, this would have been my last known address. If she could just get enough saved up, she could make a deposit on a flat of her own. Then she could flee this house and live somewhere quiet and clean, somewhere she could set up a real study, with a vintage writing desk, Toulouse-Lautrec posters in proper frames, and hundreds of books lining the walls all the way up to the ceiling. Somewhere with a view of flowering gum trees and a clear blue sky. Somewhere she would not find vomit in the umbrella stand or tennis shoes in the freezer. But even one-bedroom flats were insanely expensive in the inner suburbs of Melbourne. She still had the scraps of her postdoc funding, and she took on freelance research gigs and spent long hours tutoring and marking, but it didn't pay much, and it was taking ages to save up a proper nest egg, especially with the pressure to spend every spare hour trying to get published so she might become eligible for one of the few permanent academic jobs one day, if she could beat her way through the hordes of other desperate PhDs, of course. If she was going to get out of this fug and make a success of herself, she would need to develop some different qualities, soon. Maybe something like the killer instinct. The door flew open. "Hey!" She clutched at the slimy shower curtain, yanking it all the way to the wall. "Carry on, don't mind me." Jasmine, one of her housemates, sat down on the toilet. "I do mind," Nancy gritted her teeth. "You could have knocked." "You know my cystitis flares up when I have a panic attack." Jasmine raised her voice. My anxiety gets triggered when people knock on the front door. I think it reminds me of the time when I was 8 and my dad got arrested for stealing all those rare plants from the park. You know, the police didn't even offer us counselling. Really? Nancy banged her forehead gently against the tiles, then regretted it. Her hangover was really kicking in now. If she'd been feeling less wretched, she would have tried ordering Jasmine out of the room and possibly thrown a bar of soap at her. Not that it had worked the last dozen times. It was hard to be assertive with people who didn't notice or care what you said or did. Jasmine said, "Plus, Ahmed was playing his stupid doof-doof music at 1 a.m. Again? Nancy had gotten used to sleeping with earplugs, but they only took the edge off. And when I yelled at him, he was like, 'Well, I work nights, so this is 5 p.m. for me.' I got him back, though. 6 a.m., I tried out my new blender." Nancy shut her eyes. "Of course you did. Anyway, I wasn't going to answer the door because it made me so upset, but Joseph went and opened it, so I told the door knockers what I thought of them. Hey, I didn't know we had an election coming up. Do you think we'll get a new Prime Minister? I don't like the one we've got now. He looks tired, and I don't think he exercises. I wrote a post about it." Jasmine's wellness blog had 10,000 followers, a fact that gave Nancy a small brain bleed every time she thought about it. Damn it, even Jasmine was more successful than her, and if that wasn't an incentive to fix up her own life, nothing was. It's just a by-election. They gave me this. Jasmine shoved a flyer beneath the shower curtain. "Did you just hand me something you were reading on the toilet?" Still, her curiosity was piqued. This must be the candidate that George woman was campaigning for. Who? No one. Nancy was annoyed she'd remembered her name. Okay, George had rescued her, which was rather annoying in itself, but Nancy didn't have to dwell on it, did she? Her memory snapped back to that moment, the tight pressure of George's fingers as she'd gripped Nancy and hauled her back, the way their bodies had slammed together, George's broad ribcage surging with surprise, her breath against Nancy's cheek, the sound of her voice ringing all the way down the platform as she shouted at that guy. George was wasted handing out pamphlets. She should have been a sergeant major. Nancy could picture her in khakis and stompy boots, roaring at someone to drop and give her 20 push-ups. Inwardly, she slapped herself. What did I just say about not dwelling on it? She studied the flyer. The man on the front had a neat grey beard and twinkling eyes behind little round tortoise-shell glasses. He smiled benignly, standing in front of a happy multicultural crowd of mostly young people. The slogan read, "One Big Family." She frowned. Martin Argyle. Hey, I remember him. "I think that kimchi in the fridge might have gone off," Jasmine said. "You can have it if you want. It was aggravating my reflux." Martin used to be my lecturer at uni. She turned the water off. He was a professor of environmental justice and really popular. You know, a cool older guy with a grey ponytail and an earring who talked about polar bears and said shit in his lectures. He used to have all those starry-eyed students following him around. So, do I have to vote in this by-election? If you're recorded on the electoral roll as living at this address, then yes, it's compulsory. Nancy tried holding the clammy shower curtain in front of her without letting it touch her body while reaching for her towel and gripping the flyer between two fingers. That's totally unfair. What if I don't agree with any of the people who are running? They don't speak for me. Then you pick the candidate you hate the least. Nancy wrapped her towel around herself. It felt damp. Had someone else used it? I have got to get out of here. I saw an article on my feed that said most young people don't identify with democracy anymore, Jasmine said. So it's not very democratic that they still make us do it. Was it worth arguing about that? Nancy would rather escape. Clutching her towel, she clambered out of the bathroom, snatched up her clothes, and opened the door with her elbow. Jasmine said, "But what if these candidates are all really evil or something? What if they're like murderers?" Nancy rolled her eyes and scuttled away to put some clothes on. It wasn't hard to get things done properly. All you needed was a good system and a bit of elbow grease. After a morning's campaigning, George could pack things up in less than a minute. Sandwich boards snapped shut and shoved under one arm, flyers stacked and secured with a rubber band, all items wrapped in plastic to avoid damage, then loaded into the boot of her car, which she'd parked in her secret ticket-free space behind the railway station. A quick tally of how many flyers people had taken, and a note made of any feedback or incidents, although she might leave out what happened this morning. Her campaign T-shirt removed and folded neatly, just in case she got in a car crash on the way home. Not that it would happen, mind you. She was a top driver, had driven everything from forklift trucks to aged care buses in her time. She patted her pockets, wallet, keys, phone, and bingo, she was done for the morning. While the kids she had to campaign with dithered around and posed for pictures, she'd tried telling them how they could get organised and stop wasting time, but they'd looked at her like she was interfering. Usually she felt satisfied with how well her system worked, but today she couldn't concentrate. Her breath came fast, and her palms were sweaty. She wiped them on her jeans.
Our last MP died, and I know why.
Christ. She slammed the car boot shut. That bloody woman this morning. Bad enough that she'd talked like a snob and dressed like a scruffy student, George's two least favourite types of people, but she had to shoot her mouth off about poor old Bill too? George rubbed some mud off her bumper bar and tried to distract herself with all the things she should have said to that woman. You dozy idiot, can't you watch where you're going? You're so damn clever because you went to Unabridged, but you don't know how to stand on a platform? Do they not hand out degrees in that? You think I've got nothing better to do than scrape you off the tracks and chase down some lycra-loving wanker on a bike? And don't get me started on them. They're a bloody menace. But it wasn't like her to yell at someone on the campaign trail. She'd worked plenty of elections before, dealt with plenty of hecklers and yobbos and slack-jawed numpties who couldn't have named the Prime Minister for $1 million. Why had she been so worked up by this woman? The woman had seemed bright enough in a snotty sort of way, like she watched the news and maybe even bought the actual newspapers. Sometimes George felt like the last person in the world who still did that. The woman had crazy curly hair in a shade of chestnut brown, a heart-shaped face, and the sort of pale skin that was freckled all over, unpierced ears and big, thick librarian glasses. Her hazel eyes had grown wide when she fell. George remembered that moment of panic, the way everything had slowed as she bolted forward, snatched the woman and dragged her backwards and out of danger. She had felt the heat of the woman's body through her thin shirt and noticed the smell of her, coconut mixed with citrus, like a summer dessert. Not that George went around sniffing strange women, not that she had any bloody interest in any women right now. After the last time around, after the last woman who'd turned out to be not just toxic but actually dangerous, she would have to be off a rocker to go there again. George might not be anyone's idea of an intellectual, but she liked to think she was smart enough to learn from her mistakes.
Actually, I teach political science at the university,
she repeated mockingly under her breath. She looked around at her fellow campaigners, most of them university students. Can I blame you for this lot, then? The campaigners were gathering together now, as Tyson, their organiser, said, "All right, beautiful people, let's bring it in." He clapped his hands, summoning them for what he called a turbo meet. George knew this would involve everyone sharing one takeaway learning experience from today and offering one piece of constructive advice to another person. Last time, George had been reprimanded for talking about 80s Prime Minister Bob Hawke. Too long ago, younger voters wouldn't know him. For asking one woman whether she was a union member, too judgmental about people's choices. And for calling people sir and madam, too gender binary. After the discussion, all the volunteers would hold up their phones with an emoji to represent in a non-confrontational way how they were feeling right now. Then there would be group hugs. George always left before that part. By the time she made it over, Tyson had already started his speech. "Today was a 4-star day, team. Tomorrow, I want 5. His Majesty not joining us, then? George jerked her thumb at a poster of Martin Argyle. She didn't like candidates who left other people to pound the pavement for them. Tyson gave her a look. As I briefed everyone on our WhatsApp channel this morning, George, Martin is busy. He's giving the keynote address at a conference on gender equality. Is that why he's got all these young women doing all his shit work for him? George nodded around the group. Tyson's eyebrow ring bulged as he frowned. Maybe she could get it to pop right off his face. God knows, she'd been trying. Anyway, Tyson said, I wanted us all to take a moment to welcome a new team member. She's been based in Martin's office, but she's eager to get more hands-on experience. He waved towards a plump young woman with purple nail polish and a matching lock of purple hair falling over her brow. Guys, this is Rocket. The group chorused. Hi, Rocket. George smiled. Rocket? Like the lettuce? The young woman flinched as if George had slapped her. Like the thing that goes into space. Oh, sorry. We love and respect everyone's chosen names here, Tyson said. Right, George? She shrugged. Now, Rocket, why don't you tell us about what drew you to Martin's campaign? Because Martin's the best. Rocket's expression grew eager once more. I met him when I was in a young leaders program at school, and he got me an internship in his office. He wants young people to have a proper say. She punctuated each sentence with a determined nod. Martin gives you stuff to do, real stuff, interesting stuff, and he sticks around and listens and truly cares about you. She spoke rapidly, her gaze urgent, as if afraid the group might not take her seriously. We totally hear you, said Ashley, another campaigner, to nods all round. Martin's the real deal. And the party? George prompted. You're committed to what we stand for. Oh, yeah, Martin's got the best values, Rocket said, nodding hard. George frowned. The party still hadn't rated a mention. Rocket said, Martin's all about love and inclusion. He stands up against hate, and he encourages you to be yourself and tell your story. And, I got bullied for years at school and then in my job at the restaurant, and no one took it seriously. They were just like, suck it up, you're being too sensitive. Even when people were stealing my stuff and throwing garbage at me and posting awful things about me, saying I should kill myself, and I was having panic attacks, and still no one cared. Her words tumbled out in a rush, and she leaned in closer until George could smell her minty toothpaste. George fought the urge to edge away. She had a weird sense of being trapped. That's why I got into Martin's campaign, to stand up against people like that. You thought Australian politics would be a good place to make a stand against bullying? George's voice came out too loud and insensitive. It wasn't the first time. Sorry, it does sound like you had a rough ride, but if you go out door knocking for the party, you'll spend a lot of time getting told to F off. Sure you can handle that? She had definitely said the wrong thing. Rocket's hands trembled. George was startled to see tears in her eyes. Don't take any notice of her, Rocket. Ashley threw an arm around her. You know what boomers are like. They're emotionally maladjusted because they weren't taught how to be actual human beings when they were growing up, and they're totally entitled because they've always had everything handed to them. Boomers? George scowled. I'm in my 40s. And who are you calling entitled? I've been working since I was 15, you knucklehead. But nobody seemed to be listening. The other girls surrounded Rocket with pats and coos of reassurance. Tyson said through gritted teeth, George, could we have a quick one-on-one in 5? Sorry, I need to be home in 10. She stomped back to her car, wishing she still smoked. Was she being too hard on these kids? After all, they were giving up their time to volunteer for the same party as her, and they'd done nothing wrong except use weird words and grow stupid hair. It wasn't their fault what had happened to Bill. She was the one who'd been his friend, and a fat lot of good she'd done for him. Was she just being a cranky old grump, no better than her own parents? George sighed as she unlocked her car, climbed in, and slammed the door. Probably. But did these kids have to talk like they'd swallowed a dictionary she'd never even heard of? Did they have to be so wise and righteous and full of feelings? It made her uncomfortable, and it drove her nuts. She thought back to the woman she'd argued with this morning. What a snob. She'd clearly...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?